Good. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this cold afternoon here in Joburg. Very excited for us to be having this conversation. It feels like we're doing online, feels like we're back on the COVID route, but I think it's beautiful to also just connect with as many people as we can. And like I said, good morning to everyone. My name is Ayanda Sitebe, and I am the festival director for Africa Rising International Film Festival. And I've been tasked with this big task to facilitate this beautiful dialogue. And thank you so much for joining us. The dialogue is brought to you by the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture in association with the National Film and Video Foundation. Our topic today, in line with celebration of the African Month. Also, as we know, it's the 1st of June, so we're starting with the Youth Month as well. The departments, they found it very important for us to have this important dialogue that we'll be having today under the topic telling our African stories without boundaries and exploring African contribution. As I said, I am the festival director of Africa Rising International Film Festival, which is really aimed at promoting Pan-Africanism, championing African stories and African narratives, and also really having robust conversations. So today it's such a great honor to engage with all of you, and most importantly, with my fellow which I'm going to ask them to turn their videos on so you can start seeing their faces. My industry peers, game changers. I think this is the first time in the longest time in history where you are in the room with amazing game changers who play such a significant role when it comes to exhibiting African content. So it's a very honor to have my panelists who are joining us this morning. We have Mr. Luzuko Dilema from Afri Cinema, which is a very important platform in terms of exhibiting content, especially within the Eastern Cape. I'm also joined by Ms. Prachna, who is from the Nature, Environment and Wildlife Filmmakers. I'm also joined by Mandisa Zita from the Encounters Documentary Film Festival. And last but not least, Mr. Yalezo Njuguna from the African Film Fest. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I think just before we jump straight to unpacking today's topic, I think I know I didn't do much justice in terms of really introducing you to the viewers everywhere in the country, in the continent, in the world. Firstly, I'd just like to give you that opportunity first to really introduce yourself in terms of really what role do you play within the sector of storytelling, and if you can add as well your why in there, because I think I almost said when I saw the list of the people that I'm talking to, and I said to myself, you almost like unsung heroes in terms of the role that you play within the industry. So I would like you to introduce yourself, but in that, just unpack probably your why. Why do you do what you do? Because it is on the grassroots level mostly. It speaks to development. It speaks to it's the hardest part to do in more than the front line of our industry. Yalezo, if you don't mind me starting with you.
All right. Hi, my name is Yalezo Njuguna. I am the founder of the African Film Fest, which is a festival. It started off actually as an online watch club during lockdown. So when lockdown started, we actually had a completely different festival, which we're doing called the BAI Festival, which focuses on digital. But since we weren't able to do our festival, we still wanted to kind of continue doing audience development and engagement. So what we decided to do was, since we knew everyone was home and we knew that there was a bunch of films which were already on streaming platforms, African films which were on streaming platforms, we decided to say, okay, every Thursday and Saturday, why don't we all log on to Showmax or Netflix at this specific time and watch this together. And then the following day, we'd reach out to filmmakers to do like a live Q&A session over it. So we did that with films like So the Winter to My Skin, with films like Supermoto, films Atlantics. It was a full-on African exploration of African cinema that people could then engage with work to do so. And that is then built into a podcast, which is now built into an actual live festival where we have live screenings and conversations. And the why really is, as someone who I've been a film lover all my life, and I went to study film, and a lot of the stuff which I learned was very American and very Western. And as I started getting into the industry, I wanted to really find ways of rooting the Africanness in what it is that, first of all, researching it for myself, but also finding a way to get more of my peers also interested in African film, the breadth of it, but also really just understanding where we are and how we can tell our stories, what stories we actually have, first of all, and how we can tell our stories, but also finding ways of finding what the youthful voice within African film and African cinema is, because a lot of the time, as someone who's very young, it can feel very, at times very inaccessible or very, very far away. So our goal with our festivals really has been to do audience development and to get it a bit more accessible and find ways of speaking to the youth and getting the youth involved in African film and African cinema, so that as they develop further, we're speaking to an African tone as youth, but not just that's how I'm not sure if I've covered everything you wanted.
No, you did. That's very powerful. Thank you so much, Elezo. Mandisa, you've been championing encounters for a while now, and you've seen it grow for the longest time. I would like to give you the opportunity to introduce you and that as well, and your why.
Thanks, Ayanda. I love what Yales is saying. I think I'm in total agreement with the kind of concept of how they're connecting African cinema across the continent. And we also feel very strongly about that at Encounters. We've started to really program a very excellent quality of African cinema, just to expose people to what is happening to the documentary genre on the continent, but also to create some kind of resonance and alignment with African cinema, because as Yalezo rightly pointed out, we are heavily influenced by Hollywood and the Western style of filmmaking, and it's so embedded in our consciousness that it's almost like we have to find our own identity of the elusive African cinema, or in this case, also South African cinema. And we believe that the antidote to that is to really consume a lot of African film. And unfortunately, that is something that is lacking, not only in the country, but in the continent. We just don't have the exhibition platforms and the education at school level to expose our audiences to African cinema. So in that instance, I think festivals are quite critical and quite key to that, to bringing African stories from a uniquely African perspective, and to develop that style, especially to nurture the next generation of filmmakers. So I think that is the why that festivals are a conduit and a platform for us to learn, to become more film literate, to connect with each other, and to figure out our own cinematic identity.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Mr. Luzugo. I think Mr. Luzugo's audio is not on. I don't know if it's me or can everyone hear Mr. Luzugo? No. So maybe while Luzugo sorts out the audio, Prachna, on your side, I think, Prachna, you chose a very sort of very scarce sort of space within filmmaking, which is in nature. But also we've seen how, conversations around climate change are becoming at the forefront as well. I'll be very interested to hear your why in that space from a filmmaking perspective.
Thank you, Ayanda. And you're right, it is very scarce, it's very niche. And I think I'm going to start with the why, right? And the why started in about 2013, when my partner and I, who had previously been in entertainment and producing other kinds of content, decided to produce a nature and wildlife TV series. The TV series sat on SABC1, so it was targeted to the communities that live around our parks and our protected areas. It did really well. It had approximately 1 million viewers a week. So it was a good TV series. People loved it, but it absolutely bankrupted us. It bankrupted our company and it was a disaster. And that's where the why comes in, right? The why is because there was a complete lack of access into the genre. So the battles we had to fight to get access to the right gear, to get access into the parks, the hoops we had to jump to in order to make a friend here so that somebody would give us a permit so we could go film in the park. It was an absolute nightmare. And at that point, we thought, if we are struggling, we who had come from a music background and had access to plenty of people in the entertainment industry, how was anyone who's just breaking in going to even consider a career in nature and wildlife filmmaking? And so in 2017, we started NEWF, which is Nature, Environment, and Wildlife Filmmakers. And it's a platform in Africa, because at that point there was no platform in Africa, for filmmakers, conservationists, and scientists to engage, connect, and contribute to storytelling towards a shared vision of protecting the Earth's natural habitats and resources for future generations. And what started out as an annual Congress in 2017 has then grown, and it's incorporated capacity building, impact, and outreach. And we're aiming to build a connected network of Africans across the continent, advocating for the protection of the continent's natural habitats. We are now have formed a collaboration with National Geographic Society, and that collaboration is called Africa Refocused. What it is, it's an initiative for us to upscale the work that we already have been doing over the last few years and refocus the narrative so that the stories of Africa's nature and wildlife are increasingly told by and from the perspectives of African people. And within that, it's about bringing in people from conservation, bringing in people in science, bringing in filmmakers that are working in fiction and other documentary genres. And we say, come over to the wild side, because one, this is a really lucrative side of the industry once you are in. And secondly, it's important and it's timely, because the more stories that are told from local perspectives means we can have more impact on, like you're saying, climate change, nature, wildlife, and protecting our planet. Yeah.
Oh God. I feel like I'm going to need another hour with just each and every one of you guys. There's so much to unpack. And I think the time that's given to us is limiting, but that is so insightful. Thank you so much. Mr. Luzugo, I don't know if we've got you back on audio. No. So I think, Mr. Luzugo, maybe try and logging out and coming back on as well. We'll find a gap and give you a chance to really speak about the work you do in Eastern Cape and your why you do in this space. So just to now dive straight to the topic at hand, and I know it's a very broad topic, which is telling our African stories without boundaries. And just from your introduction, you know, there's a lot in terms of us as storytellers building our own references to find our identity. I had a lot around access as well, which is a big conversation around the space. So, but when this topic landed to you, if you could unpack it for us, and probably, Amandisa, I'll start with you. What does this topic mean to you? What does it mean to really tell African stories without boundaries, and also looking at collaboration at the same time? What did the topic say to you, and how would you unpack that?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Looking at collaboration at the same time. Oh, yes. What did the topic say to you, and how would you unpack that? We can hear you, Luzuko, but I can also hear myself back. I don't know if that's a challenge. Okay. So I'll come back. Yes, Luzuko, you can go. You can go for it, and then Mandisa will pick it up with the first question that I've posed.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Luzuko Tirima. I'm a producer first. Started at New Brighton Pictures, a company that was established in 2010 to tell African stories, basically. Our first feature was shot in 2012, and we released it in 2013, fortunately, around Stekeniko Theaters. So that is actually my why, because the film only lasted there almost 2.5 weeks, and it was only watched by roughly 48,000 people. And that was deemed a poor performance on the box office, and then it was kicked out. And then it was a realization there that we are not going to make our money back after we thought we had a good deal. So what was clear to me as a producer was that since this film is Xhosa, is meant for a larger audience, Xhosa speaking, and then obviously everyone after that. If it's out of the theater space and it's not on TV yet, maybe it's going to travel festivals. Yes, that's industry markets. But in South Africa, we made it for specifically Nguni speaking people to enjoy, because it is quite a film that's layered with lots of social ills that it wants to address. But I quickly saw that it's not going to go that route. So immediately we went on and registered as distributors now. Now we have to find ways and means outside of the conventional means to take the film to the people. So we started in 2016 with regional film festivals involving the film that we wanted to promote and other local films in PE. And then that's how Afro Cinema was born. And also, we also took some of our content and some local content to halls, community halls, and we brought like a proper cinema infrastructure into those places where people have never experienced cinema. And then that's how we developed the audience in the Eastern Cape. Currently now, Afro Cinema has grown to, we've launched 2 festivals regionally, OR Tambo Film Festival and Mandela Bay Film Festival, that we facilitate as a platform for local films to showcase their work and for filmmakers to engage audiences and for audience to experience local films as well at the same time. And then something that we've discovered post-COVID was outdoor exhibition, which is drive-in cinema. After the lockdown, that's what we ended up now specializing in, taking local films to those places that wouldn't naturally actually have access to them. So that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luzuko. Yeah, I don't think we speak enough about the importance of exhibiting and showcasing our platforms. Mandisa, just going back to that main topic in terms of how did you unpack it from your perspective?
Are you talking about like specifically how do we nurture African storytelling?
Correct. In relation to, telling our African stories without boundaries.
Okay, it is a very loaded question. I think it needs like a masterclass or something like that, because it's a big topic. But from our perspective as festival organizers and organizers of film initiatives that promote and exhibit a specific genre, which is documentary. For us, especially because documentary deals with issues of reality and social justice, we would like to see more films that reflect narratives from a uniquely African lens, you know,
Yeah.
that is unhindered by influences, that is unhindered by stereotypes, and actually attempts to break down those stereotypes about what the continent is and what the people of the continent are all about. So we love seeing films that kind of exhibit that, and also that exhibit a different perspective of Africa, which is quite difficult to find because there's such a dominant culture of cinema from the North and from the West that it's really difficult and challenging for African filmmakers to find a space and the means to tell stories that really exemplify not only our uniqueness, but our different forms and diversity and fluidity. And I think we need to start moving towards that. So for me, it's really films that are diverse in the perspective of what Africa is all about, and that actually promote the African lens, so that we show who we really are, not how others want to see us. And that's what we really promote. You're on mute, Ayanda.
Sorry. That line is back. So really speaking on championing our stories as well, I'd like to pose this question to Yalezo in terms of looking at that. We are in the Youth Month now. That voice is becoming more and more important as well. Yalezo, your projects are very youth-centered in terms of the type of content that you create and the type of content that your organization exhibit. And the question to you is, are we writing enough of these stories to sort of reach a bigger audience from an African perspective?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question? My connection broke a bit there.
I'm saying, are we writing enough content that can reach the youth? Just focusing on you, as you focus on mainly youth directed content. Are we writing enough of those stories, and do they extend to a big reach in terms of Africa and the world?
That's a very loaded question, but
I'm gonna be coming with loaded questions, guys.
if I were to personally speak, I don't think that we do. In terms of, actually, let me rephrase that. I think that they're written. I don't think a lot of them are made, because what I've kind of been within this journey that we've been doing, specifically because we have a different festival called the BAI Showcase, which is a place where digital comes alive. So that's in that platform, we showcase local web series, short films, digital VR, and we also have like musicians and musicians come in, and comedians, all who have digital backgrounds, and it's just like this little melting pot. And within the space that we see that of what's happening on the web, there is such a great variety of, even specifically in South Africa, youthful voices doing both things in a lot of genres where they have the space to be able to try and find out what their voice is. But a lot of these filmmakers also tend to not have a lot of funding. So essentially what we're getting is what is the minimal viable product of what these things could be, right? So I believe we're at a space we're starting to tell. And also there's another festival that I went to, which is also a youth festival called Real to Reality, which has the Real to Reality Festival, which is also based in Joburg. And what they do is they also focus specifically on short films, and they show short films from all around the world. But they started with student films, and then they started doing more than just student films. This year, they were showcasing from short films from all around the world, and the breadth of the stories which are coming from Ghana, from all different parts of Africa in terms of like the stories, fictional storytelling was really amazing. But then when it comes to trying to get that into a broadcasting or mainstream space, there's kind of, I don't say that the appetite isn't there, but we have a tendency of wanting to stick to very family-esque storytelling that everyone can watch. And at times that feels like it's at the expense of having stories which specifically speak to specific people, whether it's a youth story, whether it is a queer story for queer people. So I think we're at a place where we're getting to understand what our voice is for everyone, but we now need to get to more places where we are allowing things to be for themselves. So a youth for youth, youth shows that are for youth, made by the youth, in terms of where we are. So the appetite is there. The storytellers are there. We see them on the net. We see them everywhere making great short films, but it doesn't fully extend into a wider space. So it's both the yes and a no for me.
Okay. Yeah. I like your response, in terms of when you say we have these stories, but probably we're not telling enough of them. And Pragna, maybe I'm going to come to you in terms of, as a continent, are we fast catching up onto international technology threats as well? And I know because the space that you are in does require a lot of resources in terms of documenting wildlife. Les was saying we have the stories, we have the content, but do we have the resources to execute these stories?
Ayanda, I think overall, we do, because I think across the continent, the film industry is booming, right? In fiction, films are being made, films are being produced. It's how do we take those that are making the successful films and sharing those skills and sharing those knowledge so that more have access, so that more are able to make films, to take it from writing to actually producing. We're very lucky in South Africa because we have organizations like the NFVF to support us in development and in production and in post-production and in marketing and in festival hosting. We're probably the luckiest on the continent because across the rest of the continent, initiatives like that don't really exist. It's a hustle and people make it work. When it comes to nature and wildlife specifically, I would say that we are catching up, and we are catching up because we are, and specifically with our organization, NUF, we're pushing for access. We're securing the funding to be able to purchase the equipment so that we can give more people the access to use it and go out and be filmed and be hired by Silverback Films, who's producing Blue Planet 3, or, something that sits on BBC or National Geographic. So we've got to break down those barriers. We've got to find out how do we level up? And then how do we take the films that are produced on the continent and partner with film festivals across the world so that we can showcase those films? But it's there. We have the skills. We're so damn talented. We have the skills. We have the stories. We've got to share them.
Well, speaking of sharing them, Luzuko, maybe I want to bring you in. Gauteng becomes almost like the hub of the industry, but we also know there's so many untapped sort of spaces within the country. What are some of your challenges working with the young people in your area within the Eastern Cape, and what is the appetite as well for content?
Oh yeah, well, the Eastern Cape is quite underserviced. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay, one, the Eastern Cape is underserviced. It lacks your general regulation. There are no film offices. There is no film commission. it's like we are in one of the countries in Africa. It's like we're not part of South Africa, just like Pragna had said, because our only access mostly is at national level, where you can actually come up with a project that can involve the youth, where they can actually acquire skills. But then again, I just want to go back to what Umandisa said, and I think Uyalezo as well. What I sense is that generally, as a sector, we need to decolonize it.
Yeah.
Just that, yeah, we need to just, because mostly it doesn't speak at a production level. There are stories that are there that maybe African people want to hear, they are even written, but you will struggle to get it made, because the appetite where you have to sell it, you'll be told that no, it does not actually appeal to the mainstream market, which is mainstream market is something that is either of American or European origin. And then it's the influence here at distribution as well. So the youth, back to your question, has got that challenge from where I'm sitting, is that but the regulation itself, the training, where you can get the youth involved from school level to at least where they can peep that there are careers in film. If in my area that you can get things that exist in Joburg, like the Film Commission, which will have programs that will trickle down from practitioners to the aspirants, which is will attract the youth. And then obviously the youth will come with new ideas, because now they've got their own environment. The 4IR, the way they share content, they make content, your TikToks, your new platforms that went there when we started, you know, those are things that can be incorporated to get this African content out there, because you cannot vote technology away. It's also here. And that's what the youth has access to. It's just the regulation that needs to happen so that this becomes an industry with all the levels, from youth to practitioners.
Yeah, and I just talking about that as well. I think because we want to also zoom into the importance of collaboration. I do sometimes find that we operate in our own corners as industry leaders. Mandisa, the importance of all these platforms sort of coming together and sort of becoming united in voice as well, and united in how we break down the challenges and probably take this forward to the governing parties that sort of can assist with unlocking all these challenges that we've been unpacking now. What is the importance of us as an industry, as organizations, as individuals, in terms of collaborating and, coming more together in terms of unpacking these issues to just have one voice?
Thanks for that, Ayanda, and thanks, Lozuko, also for your comment about decolonizing. I think when you talk collaboration and seeing that it's African Month, I think it's actually quite an opportune time for us to start thinking about collaborating more on the continent. We do have a great infrastructure in the country. We do have support for our film industry. It is sustainable, but the National Film and Video Foundation, as the sole funder of the industry, can only do so much. And they have to fund across the board. They're funding from tier 1 to tier 3. They're funding festivals, and they're funding all sorts of initiatives. And I can imagine there's only so much in that annual budget. So we need to look beyond our country for resources, and it's quite competitive globally. There's amazing films coming from all corners of the North, South. So funding is becoming more and more challenging to secure, and it's taking longer for even established filmmakers to make quality films that they want to make, and we have great filmmakers in this country. So I think the collaboration part of it that we are passionate about is more on the continent. And what we need awareness and education about is the opportunities on the continent. Believe it or not, there's resources and money on the continent. And we we as a festival have started creating more awareness around that. We've hosted panel discussions and programs where we bring in practitioners from other African film commissions and African funders to actually start saying, look, there's opportunities for funding, for post-production facilities, for producer opportunities that can be accessed. At Encounters, we are part of an initiative that was started during COVID that is led by DocR, which is Documentary Africa, and it's called the African Real Collective. And there's about, I think, 10 or 12 of us who are documentary initiatives from the continent and the diaspora. And we initially started this initiative to bring resources and knowledge and opportunities to African filmmakers continent-wise and in the diaspora during COVID. And now it's grown and it's becoming a sharing platform that is led under DocR. And DocR is actually an African funder, a Pan-African funder of festivals, of films. And I wonder if South African filmmakers are aware that, you know, there's an African funder in Kenya, not far from us. And I think we need to access those opportunities. We need to access opportunities to work with producers in other countries so that we just increase our producer skills and elevate our films as well. And I know there's a lot of language barriers and there's treaties that need to be developed. I know that there's all these challenges, but I think there is a start to starting to work across our borders in terms of collaboration, not only amongst ourselves, but beyond.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, I see, you know, the subject that keeps coming up as well. How do we decolonize the industry? You know, Pragna, maybe I'll throw this to you. What is the first step? What do we do? And the speakers already are mentioning access to filmmaking as a discipline to schools at a younger level as well. There's a conversation of us not having enough references in institution that represents us. How does that look like when we're saying we're decolonizing the industry?
Yeah, you know, everyone has spoken to it a little bit, and I think we all sit with this unconscious bias because of the stories that we've been told and the stories that we've watched over the years and over generations, and it sits with all of us. And it was a couple of years ago at DFM, and somebody stood up in the room and said, why do we, as Africans, why are we never shown brushing our teeth? Why are we always shown as the bad guy in a film, right? And everybody, the room went silent because everyone was like, that's exactly it. Why do we not show ourselves as normal people? And we say it as well, you know, a lot in nature and wildlife is there's this perception that Africans don't care about the environment. But in actual fact, Africans are intertwined. They live within the environment. But the stories have been told by the colonizers for all these years. Why are the people on the African continent across the genre shown as guides or rangers or the people who sing for you when you jump out your safari vehicle? Yet we are a continent filled with scientists and conservationists who are actually doing the work on the ground. So yes, who's telling the story? How do you change the story? You change the storyteller. And I think all the people here on the screen are actively working to change the storyteller, actively collaborating with other organizations so that more storytellers from within the African continent have a place to showcase their films. We haven't done enough work. We've got countless hours, years more of work to do to change these unconscious biases that we sit with, right? But it starts here. It starts with, you know, when we first started our Congress, we had to make the decision because everyone was telling us, no, to be a nature and wildlife film festival. And we said, but if we're a festival, whose films are we going to show? Because in 2017, there were no films by Indigenous Africans being produced in the nature and wildlife genre. And so we started a Congress, and then we started funding films so that now this year we're producing, when I say we, I mean people within our community, over 35 short films in the nature and wildlife genre that can be showcased at our Congress, that can then be showcased at Encounters, that can then be showcased at other film festivals locally across the continent and across the globe. We need more festivals, yes, whether it's community festivals, whether it's online festivals, whether it's this great idea of Yalezos, of everybody sitting and watching a film on Showmax and then, you know, sitting the next day and unpacking it. It's an initiative. It's a way to get people talking. It's a way to increase viewership, that audience engagement. It's not about developing the audiences, it's about engaging the audiences, and how do we keep doing that? And I think partnerships and collaboration is one of the most important ways we can do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm stuck with that image of brushing your teeth, and and I think you're so right. I think you know, someone was saying we are a traumatized society, and I don't know how much of that really affects in terms of how we project ourselves through story. That's such a powerful input, Pragna. Thank you so much for that. Yalezo, maybe this comes to you as well from just a youth perspective as well. In terms of where we are as a country, the freedom that we have, just bringing in Youth Month as well now, all those young people that fought for us to have the freedom to tell stories the way we want to tell our stories. What's that inner voice in you, Yalezo, to say, actually, we are going to tell our stories as young people, but also we'll project the image that can move us forward as Africans?
So, so in terms of the projection and telling our stories, I think part of it is the subversion of, because for a long time, as you have said, a lot of the things which we've consumed of ourselves as Africans has always been in a negative light or in an overtly serious tone. So I think in terms of projection, what you're finding is us allowing ourselves the freedom to be what it is that we want to be, whether that is a little bit funny, whether that is a bit silly, whether that is serious, but allowing the breadth of Africa to not be a monolith. Because if Africa is a monolith, then essentially we're all the same, and we all have similar values, but we're not the same. We all have different things that make us unique, and you have matriarchal societies which have different ways of dealing with that, and tapping into that specificity allows us to understand what's very unique and wholesome about that, to be able to grab a hold of it. So I think the more we allow our diversity to kind of come through and to stick within itself, the more we kind of get to project what Africa is, because Africa is a multitude. South Africa in itself is a multitude of cultures. Kenya has over 50 different tribes. So to kind of say this, there's so much, we are a untapped well of resources, of stories and colors that we can tell. But also I think what the thing that I think, not just in telling the stories in terms of making the films, it's very important that we pay more attention to not just how we've made the films, but how we tell the story of the films, right? Because for a lot of people, we assume, I shouldn't say we assume, but once the film is made, one of the great things that even American films do, some European films do, is they package the film, especially if it's not something which is of your understanding. They have ways of introducing how this film is of relevance to you, right? Because one of the things which really helped me with this was I was on radio. I had a radio segment called What's Hot on the Screen on YFM for 2 years, where all I had to do was talk about content. And for the first few months, a lot of the stuff which I'd get was very American content, but then I would continuously focus on trying to center African content. So if Game of Thrones and an African series were on at the same time, I would focus on the African content. But the packages which are coming from the American shows already gave you so much understanding of how to talk about the world that when you were selling it to the audience, it was very easy. And how we talk about our content and how we package it. For example, when you watch a lot of Ghanaian films, if you start to resonate that there's a lot of like storytelling and power in water. But if you haven't like already brought that into it, when an audience is watching it, they're watching something new. So it's, how do we also engage with them for them to understand the power of what it is that they're watching, which is in the marketing of how do we get there? Because every time a new genre comes in, there's different ways that you prepare the audience to enjoy it, so that even if it's outside of their realm of understanding, they're getting a bit closer to enjoying this thing for what it is. So I think the projection that we'll also see, the projection that us as youth are trying to do is to package ourselves, at least I'm seeing on the web series front, package what it is that they're trying to do better so that they can express themselves as they are now to then grow further.
Thank you so much, Yalezo. Luzuko, I'd also like to bring you in here, just drawing from what Yalezo is saying in terms of packaging African narratives and stories. Are we doing enough of that? Because I get the sense from what Pragna was saying as well, that we have beautiful stories, we have the content, we have amazing filmmakers. Are we failing in terms of packaging authentic African stories for export to the global market?
Not really. I think the attempt is there, but the appetite, since the global market is mostly still mainstream, is mostly Western communities. So, for instance, I'm in the Eastern Cape doing research on a pre-colonial to colonial invasion story that's based from 1780 to 1812. That's when the first clashes, that's when the first 3 wars happened in the Eastern Cape. That's the history of how South Africa, the first clashes happened before the 100-year wars. And then as the rest of the wars continue, that's how the African now is changing from a pre-colonial African to a post-colonial African by the influences that are coming with the invasion, the magistrate system replacing the kings, the education system coming in, all of it from European origin, the trade, the land being accepted, and all of that. Those are stories that South Africans don't even know because they were not taught that history in school. You don't get it in school. You have to research. And then once you research, you have to go and make sure that you don't step on toes, because the research, remember, is also in archived places in universities that are people that are actually now protecting that information from trickling down. And then once you package it, I've sent my research to a few places, and the will to actually implement it and let's go. It never goes because it's going to upset a few people. It's going to upset the narrative. So I believe we are still there where there are things we cannot talk about, especially things that are before the Union of South Africa. We don't even know, most people don't even know how South Africa came about. And South Africans mostly don't know that, you know, and how oppressed the Black person was during that period until 1948, after the Afrikaners took over. So if you, however you package it, you have to go and knock at a door where they will welcome that to make it a project, whether how you're gonna, whether it's gonna be a documentary, feature, TV series, whatever. The narrative, since Pragna says, change the storyteller. Ne? The storyteller is waiting to tell their story, but the system seems like it's blocking the storyteller from telling the African story to mainstream. That's where I believe we are.
Yes, we are stuck. Okay, cool. Someone says on YouTube, this conversation is a melting pot. It's like we're starting a volcano. And I think most of the dialogues in South Africa are always that. And I feel like there's a sense of the importance of consistency in us having these conversations so that we can move forward. So they're not just ticking the box that we're having it now and then we quiet weeks in, months and stuff like that. And then next year again, African Month, we pick them up because they become overwhelming. The questions become overwhelming as well because it's things we live with. It's the struggles we live with. So for us to box it in 1 hour does become very difficult. But Mandisa, the Luzuko mentions the importance of research as well. Do you think is it something that we are neglecting as well? Research as studies and making sure that those are accessible to also young filmmakers as well who are coming into the space. There's mention of TikTok. So there's the easier ways of doing this content thing. It's fast approaching. But are we neglecting or leaving behind the importance of research within our industry?
I think, if you're talking about the younger generation, and Luzuko is right in that there's a lot of history and knowledge systems that we don't know. And how do you tap into that? How do you access that into your storytelling if you don't know? So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. In order to tell authentic stories, we need to know who we are and where we come from, and we need to embrace our languages and embrace our culture, because if you're looking at the African films, especially in documentary, that are doing really well at global markets, they're not even in English. They're uniquely African. They tell stories from an African lens. So I think when you talk about research, we need to tap into who we are, yes, and what is our history, what is our culture. But if I think about the young generation, I really feel for them, because where do they get that knowledge? Where do they access it? If you go to Europe, there's a lot of film literacy programs. Festivals are running educational programs year-round across schools. And we don't have that. We don't have the resources to really do that nationwide for a young generation. But if you want us to say decolonize our storytelling, then there needs to be a lot of film literacy on the ground, and there needs to be a lot of exposure, not only to African film, but to our books, our poems, our stories in all forms, in all genres. And I think that's something that it needs to be embedded in our consciousness, so that it's something that we execute across the board from a very young age, from the ground up, from the school's age. Ideally, children should be growing up watching old South African cinema and African cinema. They should have some exposure. They should be able to tap into that and to access it. So I think that is why festivals are important. And I think for us, that is why it was important to run the community festival program that we recently ran. That was part of the NFVFP SP funding. And when we went to the festival, we found that actually it's the community that came out to the festival, and it's young people and it's families. So there is a hunger, and there is a need, and there is a desire for young people to come watch films, local films. It was all local films, and they were very engaged, and they participated in the conversation. So the desire is there, and I think festivals can play an important role really in kind of widening the scope of our offering in a way that will impact future generations.
Beautiful. I'm going to go to questions that we are starting to receive soon, because I see we're running out of time. Like I said, these conversations, we need to create more platforms like this and allow them to be continuous. My last question, which I think I'll just ask that you keep it short, and this will be to everyone. With all that is said today, how do we use film and storytelling to really encourage that African heritage, encourage unity, encourage representation through filmmaking? What are the ideas in terms of how best we can go about that? Prachna or Yalezo, anyone can pick it up.
Yeah, I'll go first, right? Yalezo said something earlier that, and he was talking to how Africa is not one, and I think that's a very strong point, right? That we all need to acknowledge that yes, there are commonalities across the continent, but Africa is a continent and we're not a country, and we've been perceived for many years as one. I mean, yes, we are, but we're a multitude of countries within that, and that needs to be acknowledged first. And I think how we find the unity is that we find the similarities between each, and that's when you start co-producing with other filmmakers across the continent, and that has happened before, right? And I think one other thing, and I've gone totally blank on what I was going to say. Okay, let me just pick it up again. I've gone totally blank. It was to do with encouraging unity, but I'll let somebody else pick it up and then I'll remember.
No problem. I know Zoom does that, where you like, if this thought and then it just, anyone else wants to pick up from Prachna there? Yalezo?
I would actually, yes. I think it is, off of Prachna's point, it is the acknowledgement, because we have to acknowledge who we are and the breadth of what we are in all of our facets for there to be unity. Because if it's unity under the guise of one voice or one image, then that's the dominant image, and it's not necessarily unity. It's I've forgotten the word, but when you're it's a different type of colonization, because it's the dominant voice will always be the one that's there. So it's really about acknowledging ourselves, and in acknowledging ourselves and accepting what it is that makes us truthful, we can then find ways of collaborating to then find the interesting ways in which we melt together.
Wow. I think Prachna has just remembered the point. I can see the nodding is.
Yes, I did remember. So what I was going to say is that, and it's part of that decolonizing that needs to happen is, and we're all taught it, and when you're making a film, is who are you making your film for, right? And maybe we need to stop looking away at making films for global audiences and start here first, right? Because the change needs to happen here. It happens and then it grows. So start here. We watch films that were made for European, for American audiences. Why? Because they made it for them. They didn't make it for us. But we've grown to watch that, and we've got to do the same thing. Let's look at our audiences. Let's look at what our audiences want to see. Let's look at what they want to consume and tell those stories. Let us watch it, and then it will grow.
Wow.
Yeah, just to add, collaborations are a way to go. That way, it's easy to learn from each other, because we are a melting pot of different cultures, even in the continent itself. So I really enjoyed the collaboration I did with the Kenyan DRC Nigerian producers while we were developing one of our projects. And you have to have deliberate topics that are actually brave enough to raise the interest. There are many books that are written that people can go and develop into screenplays that have been written by great authors. It's a way to go, because those books are already there. You just need to select stories in your research. And then we need to be also deliberate in preserving our culture and heritage, because that's proof of the story. You know, now we know that we were misled. There was a lot of misinformation. If you look at how African wisdom supersedes some of the things that were made law during apartheid and even before that, you know, the legal system is still the Roman Dutch Anglo law. It's still that, it hasn't changed. But we as African people had a system, a legal system that predates that one, where you get your social solutions in terms of the clash, because these things always clash. So those are things that basically we need to focus on. They are there. You just need to make them work and tell the story. Thank you.
Mandisa?
I think everyone has really responded very well to that, especially on the issue of co-productions. And I mean, what I would add is that we need
Sorry,
to be-
Mandisa, your video is off. But just make, if you are aware.
I'm so sorry, my internet was dying on me as we reached the end of the panel. Yeah, I think it was answered very well by everybody, and I appreciate their responses. For me, it's actually also about being unique and being true to ourselves, because the market is ready for stories from Africa, from a new generation, from new talent. But we are not going to be successful if we are emulating others or emulating their ways. So we need to find a way that represents who we are, because those are the stories that are going to stand out. So we cannot mimic Hollywood or Western forms because they do it better and they've got tons of forms. So we have an imperative to find a way to tell our stories that really truly represents us. And I think therein lies the opportunities for us, especially as I'm always thinking of like the next generation of filmmakers that are going to really, really take South African film to the world. And also to say that there's a lot of opportunities on the continent. There's a lot of festivals, a lot of markets, a lot of funding and resources and writing labs and training opportunities. You don't even need to do a lot of research to find those opportunities. So I would encourage young people to take their authentic stories to these labs on the continent, because in working with other African practitioners, you're in an environment that is going to nurture who you are and not try and change you. And you're more likely to really, really produce a story that is quite representative of who you are. So I'd like to encourage filmmakers to look towards those opportunities.
Amazing. I've got questions coming in very fast here, and I'm worried about our time as well. There's a question here from Ryan. It's a point, then a question. Our strength is in our diversity. How the festival, public screenings, and even filmmakers, how do they access unique audience within their geographical unique settings? And I think as exhibitors, I think that's one thing that we always try and focus on in terms of developing the audiences. Luzuko, how would you respond to that? And anyone else wants to respond to it can just indicate.
Yeah, the only way is usually public screenings will be your go-to option one. And then it depends if whatever the topic of the film is focused on, and then if it's maybe a church-related story, you can maybe target going to churches and showing the film in that type of setting. That means you are going to the audience. Or you can maybe go for the outdoor route and have open air screenings, and then on parks and on parkings type of sitting where people can come in, they just sit, and then you charge a fee, they watch a movie as a community. Or a community hall is also another option. For a certain geographic area, that means that has to be now exhibition, mostly physical exhibition.
Thank you, Luzugu. Anyone else anyone wants to pick up that question, or can I move to another one? Okay. Okay, I'll move to another one. And then maybe Prachna can give this question to you. Someone says, women remain excluded in the sector. How do we look at film festivals that are female focused? I think that's the question.
How do we look at film festivals that are female focused? I think there's two things there, right? I don't think any discussion, firstly, that is about females can happen without men in the room, right? Because we exist with both. We don't exist in a female-centric world. I mean, I am feminist to a point, right? But we've got to get the input and the acknowledgement from males in order for the status quo to really change, right? So there's a lot of discussion about the female gaze and what that is. And I think that over the years, there have been more female directors coming to the fore and telling more female perspective stories. There's a film festival that happens in Europe called Nature Through Her Eyes that really puts forward films in nature and wildlife that have been produced by females, or either how do women film differently? How do we look at lighting differently? How do we approach characters different? You know, is there softness? I think also what has happened is that females, when we first started telling stories, started telling stories the same way males did. It's the same thing that happened with colonization, is the same thing that women did in how they told stories. And we've got to keep breaking down those barriers. More women at the forefront, more female directors, more female cinematographers, because that's really your lens. There's a director, but there's a cinematographer too. And those two people have to work together to really put forward a film. I don't think we can have female-only film festivals. I think it'll get an audience, but I don't think it will be, it'll be a great, how can I call it? A great moment of togetherness, a great moment of unity for females to feel like we can be in a place of power. But is it really going to make change? I don't know. Yes, we all need that amazing feeling, but it needs to make change. And by making change, we've got to get more females into the roles of actually telling the stories. Yeah.
Amazing. Mandisa, would you like to add on that, or I see you just...
Yes, I would. It's the topic I'm passionate about.
I know.
So I kind of beg to differ with the question posed by the participant, because there is so much opportunities for women right now. I mean, literally in the festival space, if you don't have a quota for women in your program, you are just a step behind. We are constantly counting how many women directors we have in our program. And if we don't, we're very concerned about it. So in a way, there's a lot of opportunities for women directors right now. And I know, although they can correct me, I know the NFVF as well looks for a certain quota for women applicants, and perhaps women, especially young women out there, need to have more confidence in their stories and to actually be bold enough to apply for funding and to put their foot in the door with those opportunities. And if they don't, they need to be mentoring up or pairing up with much more skilled and experienced female producers in order to have that confidence. Right now on our program that is launching soon, we have more women films from South Africa than men. And as well as from the continent, there's more female directed films from the rest of the continent than men. So that just shows you, and there are women-led festivals in Europe, and they're always looking for content from Africa, from the global South. So there is opportunity. So I just want to encourage young women, please have confidence in yourself. And if you don't, find a mentor or find someone who can give you that confidence to actually apply for funding and get into those opportunities, or send your film and write to the festival director, just be bold enough to get your foot in.
Yeah, cool.
Yanda, can I just add to something Mandisa said, right? So she spoke about opportunities and women-led festivals. And I think for anyone who is even interested in that, a search on Film Freeway for film festivals focusing on, female or female content, it'll come up. And it's there. So they do exist. They do exist. And she said something else really important about mentorship. Reaching out to people who you think can help you grow in the industry is so important. And I don't think anybody should ever be scared to do that, because we all had to go from somewhere to get somewhere else, right? And it's all because of mentors and somebody else opening, giving you a helping hand.
Amazing. So I think we fast approaching our time. But my last question to everyone. I had a conversation with someone sometime last week, and they made an example that South African film is sort of craving a moment like Amapiano. How Amapiano has just reached the globe. Like the filmmaking in South Africa and Africa is just lacking that Mapiano moment. And then they made reference that, but we've had that moment as well, when the likes of Tsotsis were coming out and reaching those global platforms and so forth. And then they made it there was a Kwaito moment, and they're just saying, we are craving another like a Mapiano moment for filmmakers. What do you make of that, and what are your thoughts on that? But my question actually is, what's next for our sector?
Can I speak to the Amapiano? Oh, can I speak on the Amapiano comments?
Yeah. It's not my comment. Yes.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Sorry, okay. If we're going to use that as a reference, I think then we really need to look at the fact that Amapiano is having its moment now, right? And it's had its moment from around 2019. But I've actually done a documentary on Amapiano, and Amapiano, like the sounds of it were grown from around 2008. So for 10 years, this entire genre was building in and out of itself outside of the mainstream and finding what it is that it's lacking, testing it with its small audiences and getting bigger and bigger and refining itself. So if we want to have these moments, and it was doing that without consideration of other genres, it was just really toying with itself. So for us to have that moment, it requires a lot more depthful, it requires us it takes time. It's not something which will happen immediately, but it requires continuous production of focusing on what it is that you want to do and what makes this thing unique, and getting the resources and support to do that. So it's really about strengthening the development process that we have for our storytelling on a filming side. How much time is given to writers and that type of development to then give these moments that we're talking about. Because as much as Amapiano looked like it came out of nowhere, for 10 years before, it was there. So I think in speaking to what's next, it really is giving a stronger voice and a more impactful voice to not just the filmmaking process, but the development process of what it is that we do. And on top of that, how it is, again, that once we know that this is what we're doing, because one of the comments is talking about making films for global audiences. To make a global voice, you still have to start something from afresh. So how it is that we say this is why this thing is special and packaging it. So the developmental process and the marketing of what makes this the unique thing that's special, I think, is what our next steps in terms of moving forward, as we have a lot more funders coming in to really focus on how we allow ourselves to stew in what it is that we're making. You're on mute.
Thank you, Alezo. Luzugo?
One thing that we have to be realistic about is transformation in South Africa. You know, it's either it's taking too long to be felt, or it's being stalled deliberately, you know. So you must understand that in the country, we are mostly divided. We are divided between, you know, people, the haves and the haves not. And the haves don't want transformation to happen, to open the gates for the broader have nots to come in and transform at the administrative level, at the creative level, because now people are comfortable as things are. So I'll take for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war that has divided the country. There are people who are pro-Putin, say no one will touch Putin, but there are people in the country who say we will arrest Putin in the same country, you know? So there are those dynamics in South Africa. We have to be realistic about them. That transformation obviously will follow after. Then you can only dream about transformation, about decolonization, when you have realized transformation. And transformation hasn't happened yet. If you find out of 9 provinces, there are only 4 provinces with film commissions. Make an example, you know, because in the Eastern Cape, you get film desks that are controlled centrally by government officials, whether it's economic development or arts and culture. It's not what KZN is experiencing as you see KZN thriving, not what, but I don't know why the same government would make an institution that would assist, because that film commission also helps with tourism at the same time. But you see there are provinces that are underserviced, that do not have that very important entity, you know? So those are things that you ask yourself, where is the political will? One, to just make things level so that we don't have to struggle, whereas someone next door has got same resource available to them. So transformation hasn't happened at that level. So that's the reality of where we are.
Mandisa, thank you, Luzugo. Mandisa, in closing.
That is a good question. You know, where's our moment? It does sometimes feel like, you know, we're past our moment and we're waiting for the next moment, and that is okay. You know, maybe our next moment is still coming, but I think we've got tons of moments in between. South Africa is currently killing it on the streaming platforms. I think we have it down to an art. We're doing very well with those productions, and the whole world is watching. I think documentary is doing well in its own little bubble. There's been a lot of success. I'm looking at, African Mood, which is a documentary by Shamila Sadat, has opened up in hot dogs and has traveled to numerous festivals around the world. Lobola by Sihle Hlophe has done a lot of African festivals and local festivals. And now she was in the States at a festival. And, we don't celebrate that enough. Milisi Thando, which is opening Encounters, opened up at Sundance and has been touring the US festival circuit. So in documentary, we do have quite a lot of success. These are all women directors, by the way, going back to the question of women directors, Black women directors. So I think we have our own little successes that we need to celebrate, but those films are all very uniquely African. They show stories from an African perspective around specific issues of identity or politics or heritage. They're not trying to be something else. And I think that's where the success lies. And I totally agree with Yalezo, and I feel passionately about what he said, that we need to get to the roots of actually the development of our stories. And that entails writing really, really well, in depth, and really trying to dig into the consciousness of who we are and those stories. And that's what's really going to get people, alert and excited about what's coming out of South Africa. Thanks.
That is so powerful. Thank you so much, Mandisa. And I think it speaks back to our topic as well, in terms of it's not just pushing those boundaries, but it's those collaboration, but most importantly, I think starting to celebrate ourselves as well. I think you're right. We've dimmed that light on ourselves in terms of how do we celebrate. Sihle is a perfect example, is that she's doing so much amazing work. As a community, how do we support that and celebrate that? And so I think there is some work to do in terms of just how we celebrate each other and how do we put that spotlight on each other as well. Pragna, your response to the question as we close.
I feel like I don't want to dampen what everybody else said, so I'm going to keep it very short. And I think, the moment is there, and we've got to keep building it. We've got to focus on telling authentic stories that are true to yourself and true to your values. And that's how we'll get African stories out there. All the films that Mandisa mentioned were truly authentic. They were not trying to please anybody, right? And if we keep doing that and focusing in and really honing in on our true selves, we'll have our moment to shine. And we have been having those moments to shine. So we just got to keep at it and keep pushing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and shoot.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you so much. I'm beyond inspired by this conversation, and I hope it can touch a lot of people. Thank you so much. It speaks to the need of us to have this conversation, to come together as people who are in a space of exhibiting Pan-African films and break down this conversation. Thank you to the NFVF and to the Department of Sports and Arts and Culture for creating this platform. And we pray for more platforms like this, which can enable our industry to grow and reach those strides that we were just mentioning in this conversation. So thank you so much. Have a lovely, I think celebrating Africa should be every day. And Youth Month as well, we'll be celebrating that, and we hope we can see more content that represents that. Yes, it's every day. Thank you so much.